Hi, everybody. I'm here today to talk to you about mining and minerals, and we're going to go through the two different types of mining processes, surface mining and subsurface mining. We'll look at some of the techniques that are used to take minerals out of the ground, and then, of course, since this is AP Environmental, we got to talk about the environmental damage of mining. So let's get started. So you may be asking yourself, what is a mineral? Well, a mineral is a concentration of elements that's found here on Earth. They took millions and millions of years to form, so we classify them as a non-renewable resource. Because it's non-renewable, that means once we take it up out of the ground and use it, it's pretty much gone for forever. It will not be regenerated within our lifetime. So what are the three most common things that we mine? Well, we can separate them into categories. First of all, we have the metallics. So these include things like iron and copper and aluminum. Secondly, we have the non-metallic minerals. So things that are not in the metal category of the periodic table. So things like salt and clay and sand for our beaches. And then lastly, we do mine things for our energy resources. So things like coal and uranium and even oil are things that we mine from the ground. Now, in AP Environmental, you may see the word ore. And so what is an ore? It is the rock that contains the mineral that we want to mine. So sometimes the mineral is locked up in a rock. And so we need to take the mineral out and, of course, discard the rest. So the thing that we want, the usable stuff, is the ore. And the rest of the stuff is called the gangue. So if you take a look at this picture here, you can obviously the gold ore, that's the thing that we're mining for, and the leftover, the rest part of it is called the gangue. A common technique that's used to remove the ore from the gangue is through the use of a smelter, or the process called smelting. Now, my students have told me about smelting, that it comes up in a video game called RuneScape, and it's so weird that they already kind of know what this process is without me even having to teach it. But what they do in smelting is pretty much melt down the rock to remove the ore to be used in our industrial processes. Now here are some common ores that you may see. So bauxite is actually a great source of aluminum. Pitchblende is a good source of uranium. Galena is actually a great source for lead. We have quartz, which source is silicone. And then hematite is a great source for iron. So what you would want to do is take these rocks or mine them and then remove the essential mineral and I guess, discard the rest. Just a little fun fact. Did you know that oxygen is the most abundant element in the Earth's crust? And if you just stop to think about it, because a lot of people think it's like carbon or something organic, but a lot of minerals or elements are combined with oxygen. For example, calcium oxide, iron oxide. You often see oxygen that combines with these minerals. So after thinking about it that way, you might think, oh yeah, that does kind of make sense that oxygen is the most abundant element in the Earth's crust. So say I wanted to go out and be a miner. Well, how would I know where to mine? Like, where would I find my mineral deposits? There's a couple of techniques that we can use. First, you can use aerial planes or spotter planes that can look down at the surface of the Earth and tell by color differences, topography differences, that there may be minerals in the ground. You might also be able to use some of these tools. For example, like a Geiger meter can pick up on radioactivity. So if I was mining for uranium, I would probably want to use one of those. Say I was mining for iron, how would I pick that up? Well, iron is magnetic, so something like a magnetometer would pick up on iron deposits. So those are just a couple of tools that you can use to actually spot and find the minerals before you do your exploration. And so once you've identified where you think the mineral may be, you have to start drilling to do exploratory drilling to figure out, is the mineral in the area and is it worth it to actually go into the ground and mine? So like we just said, here's some pictures of the exploratory drilling. So once you think you've identified your mineral, you have to go into the ground and obviously dig a little bit to extract some samples to see is that ore present in your soil. Now, depending upon where your mineral is located, you can use different techniques to obtain that mineral. So if the mineral is deposited near the surface of the earth, you're probably going to want to use surface mining techniques to get to it. If your mineral deposit is deeper down into the earth, you're probably going to want to use subsurface techniques to get to that mineral. In both cases, though, you create what's called overburden or spoil. And that is the stuff that pretty much you don't want if you're a miner. So the mineral is the good stuff. That's what you want to get to. And in order to get to that mineral, you usually have to move a whole bunch of other stuff. And we call that other stuff overburden or spoil. So our first surface mining technique is called open pit mining. And it's pretty simple to understand because it pretty much describes what it is in the name. It's an open pit. So basically what you do to get to your mineral is dig a huge pit into the ground. And as you go through, you take out the mineral and obviously you move the overburden to the side. Some common things that are mined this way are copper, iron, and sand. And so here's a great picture of an open pit mine. So you can see they do get quite large in size, and it really just depends on how much mineral there, and that's what will determine how big the pit gets. Here's another great picture of an open pit mine. So you can see again, they do get quite large. Our second surface mining technique is something called dredging. And dredging is most commonly done with sand. So in dredging, as you can see here, you employ the use of a crane, and it pretty much just drags along and picks up the sand and moves it. You will commonly see dredging happen behind a dam because a lot of times you have to move the sediment that's built up behind the dam, or else the dam doesn't work properly. You can also see dredging along the shoreline. A lot of times sand deposits, because of the man-made materials like seawalls that we put in place, the sand gets deposited in places that we really don't want it to be. So we use a dredger and we pretty much pick up the sand and move it back along the shoreline so that our beaches don't erode away. Our third type of surface mining technique is called the area strip mine. And so in this, just kind of like how the name implies, what you do is you cut away strips of land at a time. So once you cut away a strip, you remove the minerals and of course push the overburden to the side. And once you're done obtaining the minerals from that strip, you cut away another strip and you continue on until there's no more mineral left. Our fourth surface mining technique is something called mountaintop removal, and this is actually outlawed in the United States now. The idea, pretty simple. You find a mountaintop that has minerals that you want in it, and you blow it up. So you use TNT or explosives, you place it in there, and you blow up pieces of the mountain each time. Unfortunately, I bet you could all tell, this really, really is destructive on habitat, and that is why it's outlawed here in the United States. Take a look at this picture. Here's just an example. So you can see it's pretty destructive on the habitat in the areas. So something that many people love is gold, right? It's a very valuable commodity. But I think a lot of people don't realize that it's actually very environmentally damaging to extract. For starters, one of the elements that miners use is cyanide. And I think we all know that's a very toxic poison that has been used in history. Well, so if miners think they have this giant heap, this pile of rock, and maybe gold is mixed in it, what they'll do is they'll spray cyanide onto the heap. And the idea is that the cyanide will bond onto the gold. And once they do that, it makes it water soluble. So once you have that, you can easily separate the gold from the rock. And so it's a technique that miners love to use because it makes gold extraction from maybe a heap that doesn't contain a lot or is very low grade. It makes it quite easy. But as you know, cyanide is very toxic, it's very poisonous. So if it is used and animals or birds come along and ingest any of the material in the area, they will get very sick. Also, if you spray it there's no guarantee that the cyanide will stay in place, so it can easily run off into the nearest waterway and affect the aquatic systems there. Also, if a liner is being used to protect the ground, sometimes those liners have holes. So even though we may think, okay, we're lining the ground and we're protecting it, there's still chances of that cyanide getting out into the environment. So let's talk about subsurface mining. So if your mineral deposit is deep down into the earth, you have to employ this method in order to get it out. The basic philosophy is quite easy. If you're the miner, you dig tunnels and shafts to get down to that mineral, and then of course you extract it. So things that are commonly mined this way, zinc, copper, sometimes gold, definitely coal and diamonds. So if you've seen any sort of movies relating to diamonds, you've probably seen subsurface mining. Yes, there is less of environmental impact when you subsurface mine. However, there is still some damage. On to environmental damage. So let's look at some of the things that can be caused by mining. One of the things that could occur is called subsidence, and this is where the land sinks. Now, why would this occur? Well, when you're digging underneath the ground or even on top of the land, you can shift some of the geologic stability. And when that happens, it may cause the ground to collapse. So why is this a problem? Well, if homes are in the area, obviously they would be shifted in position. A lot of things are underneath the ground. We put our sewer pipes and our gas pipes underneath the ground. So if the land does collapse, that does lead for a chance of the pipes breaking. You can also have fish kills, or animals can get sick, because when you do mine, and we talked about gold cyanide, but there are obviously other chemicals that miners can use. They spray that into the ground and it may run off and affect the local organisms of the area. So they can ingest those materials and get sick. With all of the mining techniques, you can make the argument for habitat loss. Each and every one, whether we're talking about open pit mining or even subsurface mining, you have a loss of habitat for the creatures that are in the area. Yes, that even includes the moles, because a lot of people think, oh, subsurface mining doesn't really have any kind of habitat loss. Well, you got to think some of the organisms that live there would obviously be. Another issue that's often not thought of is transportation. So in order to get the minerals from where they're mined to where they're going to be used, there's usually some sort of transportation, right? Well, in getting the minerals from point A to point B, a lot of energy is used. That energy is usually some sort of fossil fuel, which releases greenhouse gases when burned. Of course, that leads to global climate change and all the effects of global climate change. Secondly, what if that transportation method has an accident? So say a train gets derailed or a big truck gets into an accident, you would have some major spillage of that mineral. So lastly, what we're going to talk about is something called acid mine drainage. So in this, the bacteria that are in obviously the soil, they can eat what's called iron sulfide. And sometimes that is a chemical found in the spoil of mines. So when they digest iron sulfide, they can make a byproduct called H2SO4, which is sulfuric acid. That sulfuric acid can run off into the waterways and obviously pollute the waterway with acid. So you can get toxic kills of fish and other organisms ingesting that sulfuric acid, and it's quite deadly for the organisms of the area. So back in the past, it was a common practice for miners to come into an area and mine for the mineral that they wanted, and then they would just leave. So all the destroyed habitat, they would just leave there because there was no mandate for them to clean it up. So what the government did was they passed this law called SMRCA, the Surface Mining Reclamation and Control Act. And basically what it says is the miner has to put aside money before the operation begins. And the reason they do this is to ensure that there will be money after the operation has stopped to fix the land, to reclaim the land as it's called. And so they have to put pretty much everything back to the way it was. Now I think we can all argue that it's never going to look the same, but at least they attempt and try to reclaim the land instead of just leaving it like a totally destroyed, barren place. All right, well, that concludes our talk on mining. I hope that was extremely helpful, and thank you guys so much for watching.